Micro-teaching has a huge advantage because for a novice teacher, imagine a novice teacher, person who hasn't done any teaching at all, going into the classroom and teaching for 45 minutes, 50 minutes, dealing with, using a series of skills and concepts. I'm talking about ideal teaching. It's very easy for an English teacher to go into a classroom, read out something, explain it, and so on. I'm talking about good teaching, in which the teacher introduces a different concepts, different skills, one concept or skill building upon another, because you're teaching a whole lesson. It's very difficult. Planning, implementation, both are difficult. For a novice teacher, it will be easy to plan a 10-minute lesson, focusing on one particular skill, implementing it, coming out of the classroom saying, "Habba, it's over." Let him have that feeling of relief, that sense of relief, possible thanks to micro-teaching. Now, as Rajkumar rightly pointed out, micro-teaching was, it was Stanford University which hit upon micro-teaching as an important tool for training students in teaching, classroom teaching. In the 1960s, a big project was going on at Stanford University, funded by Ford Foundation and Kettering Foundation. Right. On the project, a huge team of researchers was trying to formulate a set of testing and evaluation scheme, right, for measuring teaching skills, measuring the attainment of teaching skills, how the teaching skills exhibited themselves in the classroom, in a teacher's teaching, the attainment of teaching skills. They formulated, 5 steps. Teach, not teach. Briefing is the first stage. The supervisor, mentor, I'm sorry. The supervisor or mentor briefs the novice teacher, the trainee teacher, and then he plans, and then he teaches, and then the peer observers and the supervisor, they critique the teaching, they analyze it, they assess it, and they give feedback to the teacher on his teaching. And it doesn't stop there. At our workshop on our FDP, it's going to stop there, right? Here, the teacher replans his micro lesson on the basis of feedback and discussion and reteaches. That also, they formulated this kind of plan, right? In any good piece of micro-teaching, there should be these 5 stages. The briefing stage, in which the supervisor, person like me, briefs the trainee or the teacher, novice teacher. As a matter of fact, in a typical micro-teaching situation, it is a supervisor who allots the skills to students, trainee teachers. You do this skill, you do this skill, and so on. And he also explains to them how the skill could be taught. It takes different forms. He gives a lecture containing do's, don'ts, do this, don't do this, and so on. Sometimes he gives a checklist. They have to follow the checklist. Sometimes he does modeling. He gives a micro lesson himself, right? Or sometimes often he brings a demonstration video, plays it, students watch it, they know how micro-teaching should be done. Incidentally, last night I watched quite a few micro lessons on YouTube Not one of them qualified in my assessment. You must also have done the same thing, right? Terrible micro lessons. I didn't want to expose you to those micro lessons because, after all, you're all veteran teachers. You're not novice teachers. You go and teach a full lesson, a complete lesson containing different skills, different concepts, different stages, and so on. All that you have to do here is to pull out one of those skills or concepts or stages and then teach it. That's all. Okay. What was I doing? I'm talking about briefing. And then the planning stage. Here, the training prepares a lesson plan. It decides how he could put that particular skill allotted to him into the lesson. He also thinks of the things that I pointed out, such as, starting the lesson, beginning the lesson in a motivating manner, creating a situation in which, students respond to your questions related to that particular skill that you're teaching. And then reinforcing their learning, consolidating their learning. It's not enough if you teach. You will have to see that the learning that the students have gained is consolidated, reinforced. This is where exercises come in. Right? And then concluding the lesson in a smooth way, not in an abrupt way. The whole thing is planned. That's why lesson plans are written. Since you're not novice teachers, lesson plans are not necessary. In a typical micro-teaching lesson plan, you have to put down each and every move of yours. Now the problem with this is that when it is given to observers, the observers carefully monitor this to the exclusion of everything else. That's why I didn't want you to have this distraction. It's enough if the teacher tells you what his objective is, which skill he is going to teach, and so on. That will be enough. Okay. Thirdly, the teaching stage. The teacher teaches, the teacher trainee teaches. Some of the, fellow trainees play the role of students, and a few trainees play the role of peer observers, and there is a supervisor who is observing. Then fourthly, the critique stage. Teaching is over, they all sit together, the teaching is analyzed. If a video recording of the teaching is available, it will be easy. You can play the video also during the critique stage. Otherwise, the observers and the supervisor will have to depend on their memory. They would, of course, have noted down things. So they'll analyze the micro-teaching. Suppose a teacher has gone beyond that particular skill, as you did in your planning yesterday. You tell him, you need not have done this. This could be the focus of a different micro lesson, and so on. They will analyze, they will evaluate. Done it well, right? Your micro-teaching succeeded to a great extent, to a small extent, and so on. Also, they will also give you feedback for improving your teaching. That's the critique stage. And then the reteach stage, the teacher trainee replans his lesson in the light of the analysis, evaluation, and feedback. Reteaches, and the same procedure. You have the observers and so on. So as a result, what happens is the teacher becomes skilled in teaching a particular skill. Over a period of time, after the teacher has experimented with several skills, the teacher becomes skilled at teaching different skills. When he gets into the classroom later, right, he has got a repertoire of skills, stock of skills. Right. He can simply use the skills that he has mastered in micro-teaching sessions. The idea behind this is the behaviorist school of psychology. It comes from the behaviorist school of psychology, right? Take some skills, practice them, master them, and then when you get into the classroom, the skills get translated into your actual lessons. Right. Things don't happen this way. We'll talk about it when we talk about the disadvantages of micro-teaching. Okay. Now, here if you look at next slide, please. It's here how to open a lesson and so on. Let's go to the next slide. Next slide. Okay. Now, examples of teaching skills, techniques, behaviors that could be the focus of micro-teaching lessons. They are not there on the slides. You will have to look at the handout. They are listed on the handout. I mean, there are things that I have talked about. I have just talked about, such as lesson opening and closure. The number of questions the student teacher asks, it's not there. Don't worry. Handout. The types of questions he asks, the types of questions. Does he ask too many open questions? Too many close-ended questions? Right? It's very easy for students to ask, close-ended questions. When did it happen? What's your name? And so on. Open-ended questions, it's difficult. The why questions, the how questions, right? Does the teacher ask that kind of questions also? Does the teacher ask critical questions? And how do students respond to the questions? The student teacher's responses to the student's performance. When you ask a question and a student gives an answer, how do you respond to it? Right? Do you compliment the student? Do you congratulate the student? Right, sit down. Right? That also matters. The ways used to check students' understanding. It depends upon not just questions, other strategies also. That could also be the focus of a micro lesson. How students are chosen to respond to questions. Do you put all your questions to brilliant students sitting in the front row? Do backbenchers also answer the questions? Explanation of lesson procedures. Sometimes when you set a task, set up an activity, and students don't do the activity well, perform well, it could be due to your instructions going wrong. Probably you have not given the right instructions. Probably the students have not understood your instructions well. Right. That's why there is a school of pedagogy which believes that the instructions could be given in the mother tongue. Students can understand the instructions and then they can perform the task in the target language well. The use of visual aids, the use of technology, organization of pairs, groups. How do you organize groups? Do you put all brilliant fellows in one group? Right? Or do you organize mixed groups? The advantage is in a mixed group, the advantage is that, not so, a student who is not a good speaker, right? He feels enabled because of the presence of a leader, a person who is good at speaking. He drags him into conversation, right? He asks him, come on, why don't you talk about this, and so on. Selection of appropriate materials for the planned lesson, otherwise teaching will fail. Transition between activities. Do you progress smoothly from one activity to another? How do you effect this transition? Sequencing of activities. Is one activity connected to another activity, or do all the activities stand apart? How vocabulary is presented, how grammar is presented, how skills are presented, the amount of teacher talk in the classroom, the amount of student participation in the lesson, use of gestures and eye contact, body language. The amount of teacher talk, the amount of student talk. In a grammar class, instead of introducing a situation and making students respond to the situation, if you set about explaining a grammar concept, then, teacher talk is likely to be much more than learner talk. Must keep this in mind.